When I was 25 and a half, I started a podcast. The goal? To review some of the newest and the latest movies, along with some other stuff. With the help of my guests, I was able to do this, but there were dark forces tampering with my podcast, and with me. They called it an improvised podcast for some reason. I eventually found help in the form of myself. Yes, the me from a universe where the movies I reviewed got delayed. Apparently, my podcast made it to his universe. I know now that it is my duty, for the good of that universe, nay, the multiverse, to keep recapping and reviewing these movies, to hold listeners over until they could eventually see the movies as they were made in their world. For some reason, they come out differently in my world, but it's kind of entertaining that way. My name is Steven Shinder, and this is Delayed Replay. Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Delayed Replay, that podcast where we recap and review movies that got delayed in that other universe because they came out on time in our universe. I'm your host, Steven Shinder. It's been a bit, and this time we're talking about Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, that new reboot movie. And joining me once again, it is Ted from Ted's Booze Cellar and his YouTube channel Gitbag the Great. How are you? What have you been eating recently?
Thanks. I'm as apathetic as ever. As many people know me, I'm the Stephen's sexy British friend who sounds an awful lot like a Disney supervillain because of the way I have a smooth, rough, salted caramel voice. But generally speaking, I've been doing quite well. I've been doing good at my job. I've been flittering in between the different dimensions where different movies have been released at different times. I went to one recently, actually, where Forrest Gump was filmed with George Clooney instead of what's his name?
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks, yeah, and it was so weird. It was bizarre. And then Batman instead of Clooney with Sylvester Stallone, and that was really odd. So
Batman and Robin with Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah, instead of George Clooney, it was really strange. But no, generally speaking, I've been doing all right. I had sushi today for brunch. Last night, I just had a bit of a lazy night, and I had a Turkish kebab for dinner. Tonight, I'm making steak with mashed potato, and then tomorrow, I'm going a little bit healthier by making some chipotle chicken strips on top of salad. So yeah, generally speaking, I've been living well recently. Thanks.
Yeah, later I'm probably having some Chef Boyardee lasagna. So yum.
Are you going to microwave it the same way you do your bread?
I mean, I'm putting it in a bowl and then microwaving it, so it's normal, I guess. I mean, it's better than putting the can in the microwave, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, anything's probably better than that because you don't want to die.
Yeah, or dimension hop without coming back somehow. So, yeah. Like you've been doing it safely, so yeah, I guess this trick is being like a good cook or something. I don't know.
Or actually, you know what you just reminded me of is I can't remember what the guy's name is, but I remember H3H3 once did one or two videos on this guy, and it was like a cooking channel on YouTube. I don't know if it's still around. It's just like this elderly kind of like Eeyore looking kind of guy he seems nice, but he's really sort of kind of like a bit morose and kind of sad. And he just makes meals just using a microwave, and it's like one of the most depressing things I think I've ever watched. But it's also like kind of this weird, subversive, like unintentional black comedy as well. I can't remember what the channel is called, but that guy's name on that channel is actually Steven, I think. So I was just thinking like, oh no, maybe this is Steven like 30 years from now in a different dimension.
Yeah, I'm really curious what I'll be like in 30 years, but anyway, that's a story for another day, I guess. So I guess we'll start by talking about our experiences previously with the Resident Evil franchise. So this one is
kind of based on the first two games. Have you played any of the games before?
I've played most of the games in at least a passing sense. I think the first one I ever played, weirdly enough, was actually the third game. It was like one of those situations where I was like, it was back in the 90s where like your parents didn't really fully understand what a game had in it, and then they just thought like, oh, this is a video game, I get it for child, they enjoy. And then it turns out like not only is it kind of violent and dark and and kind of adult, but it's also like the third game in the series, so like you need to go back and try the other ones, but then you can't for like another 8 years because you're only 10. But generally speaking, yeah, I played quite a bit of the first three games, tiny bit of 6, a little bit of 5, and just for the memes, I've also played Resident Evil Survivor, even though it's notoriously probably one of, if not the worst game in the entire franchise.
Oh, when did that one come out?
That one came out, I think, I can't remember exactly. It was like right at the end of the 90s. It was kind of paradoxically, it was kind of piggybacking off of the success of the House of the Dead games, because it was an on-rail shooter for like consoles. But whereas the House of the Dead games kind of just embraced themselves in terms of their mechanics and their setup, this game kind of tried to do it both ways in terms of like the Resident Evil style tank controls as well as also the on-rail shooter, and it just didn't work. Plus, the voice acting in it is somehow worse than in House of the Dead 2. So it's just immaculately terrible, but it's a strangely encapsulating turd of a game.
Wow. Yeah, I've never played any of the games to my recollection. I've mainly known about the movies. I remember I saw the first one several years ago, or I think it was sometime when I was a teenager, and I remember thinking it was okay. And like I was watching it with my brother who had seen it before, and like he knew more than I did about it. And I guess like at the very end of the movie, like when it ended, I was trying to be annoying, so I was like, that was funny, and he was like, that was the stupid thing that I said. And then I didn't watch the sequels until like getting ready for this episode. Well, like I rewatched the first one, and I watched half the sequels on Hulu and Netflix before they left and expired, and I watched the last two, like rented them from Prime. So like I already knew what to expect, just based on what I've heard from you, the Resident Evil expert in our circle of friends, I guess. And yeah, like I felt like the first two were kind of okay, and then it just kept getting progressively worse. And then the final chapter, like I think I even joked that like it might as well be called the final chapter. So
I genuinely, I don't think I had a Letterboxd account when I first watched and reviewed the final chapter, but I think I said it to you that it genuinely feels like it was based off of fan fiction writing, because it kind of discounts pretty much every bit of character building from the previous movies, and even then, none of its writing works at all, even either within the franchise itself or as part of itself as a standalone movie. It just does it does nearly everything wrong, and it might actually be like, I don't like. There's quite a lot of films I don't like in the mainstream. Like you and I obviously disagree on Star Wars Episode 8. Like you really like it, I absolutely hate it. And I've said before, I personally think it's one of the worst mainstream big blockbuster films ever. But then I would probably say that it is at least followable and at least competent on a basic level. But the final chapter might be one of the most incompetent, poorly made, and just hard to follow films I've ever seen. Because it's just like, you're watching it for like an hour and a half, and then you're just like, wait, what's happening? Like, you really don't know what's going on. And then when you realize what's going on, you're just like, wow, that's really stupid.
Yeah, like a couple of the sequels pick up right from the end of the previous one. There's even, I think it was the fifth one, began with like backwards reverse action sequence, like to sort of rewind, and it looked kind of dumb to me. Like it felt like in the fourth one with the slow-mo shots and there with the reverse sequence, it felt like the director was trying too hard to be artsy, and it just didn't work.
I think I know what you mean, actually, and that would look like you said, kind of atrocious. I mean, I would say I quite liked the first three films. The fourth film I didn't think was particularly amazing, but I do think it had, at the very least, interesting cinematography. And then, I think the last films after that were just beyond incompetent. But like I said, especially the final one, because that one is just easily amongst the top 10 worst mainstream films I've ever seen, and it's probably amongst the top 10 worst films I've ever seen all time, just like period as well. And it is incompetent on a level I didn't think was possible for a movie with that kind of budget.
Yeah, it disregards what happened like right before, and like Alice doesn't feel like she worries enough about what happened to the other characters, and it's like they're just using her as a vehicle to go from set piece to set piece, do the action, do the thing, and it's just by this point I was like checked out and was like, I'm glad this storyline of these 6 films died here. Like the saving grace is that this one, like some movies with the title The Final Chapter, like Shrek, Saw, Final Destination, Friday the 13th,
jump going from
Nightmare on Elm Street.
That's a jump going from Shrek to Saw.
Yeah, like they've all had like the final whatever in the title, but like there's like still a couple other things that come afterward that continue the story on, whereas this one, like there's a Shrek 5 in development apparently, but
Shrek 5 Revengeance.
But with Resident Evil The Final Chapter, like I'm glad that it's at least the final chapter of that story, which like I think that story was not really based on the video games from what I've heard. Like I know Alice is like an original character or something, and so I'm kind of glad that's done. Also the first movie had this scene that reminded me of Cube, which came out a few years earlier, with the lasers that like slice the person in half.
I see what you mean. Yeah, I kind of get that scene from the first Resident Evil film. I wasn't necessarily thinking of Cube, but I was actually thinking of like a really dark version of like the Crystal Maze.
Oh, I've never heard of the Crystal Maze.
It's like it's a really fun, it's an awesome challenge and games show from the UK from the 1990s, and the guy who presented it became a celebrity from presenting it, and then over the years that kind of just got him a bunch of weird film roles. Like for example, he was the leader of the Thieves Guild in the first Dungeons and Dragons movie, and in a role where he gets one of the main characters in that film to go through a trap gauntlet to gain a MacGuffin, and it's just like this. I'm pretty sure he wrote that in, but it was an awesome show during the 90s. It was like a quintessential children's TV if you were a kid in the 90s in the UK.
Which I wasn't, so yeah.
Just another indication of why the UK's better.
Yeah, I just had, I think 90s US kids pretty much just had Legends of the Hidden Temple, and then later on, like Slime Time Live or whatever was on Nickelodeon.
A lot of weird Nickelodeon cartoon sort of game shows which just had just slime just being launched at people.
Yeah, like the other day I watched this documentary called Nickelodeon The Orange Years, which was basically talking about like a golden age of Nickelodeon that happened in the 90s or whatever. And it made me want to look up, like, what is the Nickelodeon slime made of? I Googled this. So, like, it says vanilla pudding, applesauce, green food coloring, and a little oatmeal. Which I never would have guessed, but there you go. But anyway, those are my thoughts on the first 6 Resident Evil films. And I also watched this Netflix animated show called Resident Evil Infinite Darkness. and it feels like it's set within the world of the video games from what I can tell. Like it takes place between, and it's pretty much like watching 4 episodes of video game cutscenes like as a storyline. It's not as action-packed as the films. It's more like geopolitical intrigue, and it was kind of hard for me to follow. That was probably my bad for like not playing the games or not knowing the characters that well beforehand. But yeah, I was kind of bored by it, so it might not be for everyone.
I mean, most Netflix adaptations they're not great. Like, I mean, I don't have any high hopes for the Cowboy Bebop one, and I mean, was it Netflix that did the live action adaptation for Death Note?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, because I think that's what started the meme of like Netflix adaptations being terrible, and I mean, I would personally say that most of them are pretty ropey because, oh man, it's just so they just leave you so deflated because it just leaves you with a feeling of like, did you even watch the original?
It reminds me of my friend Mauricio's review of the Death Note movie. Like, I think he said something like, I mean, at least I was entertained. 6 out of 10 as a movie, negative 80 million out of 10 as an adaptation.
Yeah, it's just like, that's kind of like my feelings towards the first Dungeons and Dragons movie. It's like 10 out of 10 for entertainment, but objective quality, it's like minus 100.
Yeah, it's been forever since I've seen that Dungeons and Dragons movie, but I remember thinking, this is not as fun to me as the game is, as I was playing at the time.
No, it is fun. It's just not fun in an objective way. It's fun ironically because it's basically just like an hour and a half of like this really generic fantasy story counterposed against a couple of really weird kind of pointless characters in the background, along with Jeremy Irons as this butt-nut insane antagonist who overacts the living hell out of every scene he's in, and then Bruce Payne as his main henchman, who just like minces and sort of sneers at everything.
Yeah, and they use weigh-ins as like cringe comic relief.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the most painfully late 90s, early 2000s insertion of like comedy ever.
Yeah, so now we have the reboot film Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. Out of these actors, the one I recognized the most was Avon Jogia. I remember him from the Nickelodeon show Victorious. He played Beck on that. And yeah, he plays Leon from the Raccoon Police Department. But of course, I'm getting ahead of myself. We have like these other main characters like Claire Redfield and Chris Redfield, played by Kaya Scodelario and Robbie Amell, respectively, sister and brother. And we have Jill Valentine from Stars, and she's Chris's partner. Albert Wesker, also at Stars, turns out to be a double agent for the Umbrella Corporation. So, yeah, it seems like, from what I can tell, it feels like they pulled characters from the games. Now, I'm like not as familiar with that world. So as someone who's played at least a bit of the games, like, how did you feel about how the characters were portrayed, like as an adaptation and I guess as just a movie in general?
I think is one of the biggest contrasts in between sort of like how a character acts and how they sort of look, because the way they act is at least somewhat believable, but like they really just I get there's got to be a sense of adaptation when you're adapting a character from a intellectual property, but it's like at first glance, even with knowing it was Resident Evil, I just couldn't immediately tell that they were the respective Resident Evil characters. I just don't think they got the visual aspect of it down particularly well. But I will say that at least in terms of the actual behavioural aspects of the characters and how they're written, they do feel at least somewhat like the characters they're meant to be. So it's a weird contrast between visual and sort of theoretical representation of the characters. I mean, I think overall they did as good a job as they possibly could, considering. Yeah, I'd say it's funny as well because like a lot of the actors I think did do a good job, even the ones I don't think did particularly great. Like I don't think the actress who played Ada Wong was amazing, but she was fine enough. But I will say every one of the actors felt like one of those actors who you don't quite recognize, but you do remember from seeing in something in a few different places. If you see what I mean, like sort of like those kind of action film kind of actors that you sort of like, oh, I recognize that person, but I can't remember from where.
Yeah, it's like they're not A-list enough for people to remember right away where they've seen them. But
yeah,
another one that looked familiar to me is Donal Logue, who played Chief Brian Irons. Now,
oh yeah,
it's the guy who played Harvey Bullock in that Gotham TV show. So yeah, here he is again playing someone in the police department. I kind of wonder if he's been typecast now, but yeah.
What was sort of like gruff police chief?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, like the gruff police chief who seems a bit incompetent at first, but actually means well, and he sounds like he's gargling cigars.
Yeah, that's actually a good description of how he is here. Gotham was a really weird show, to say the least, but I really liked his portrayal of Harvey Bullock in that. It was kind of refreshing after seeing the Harvey Bullock of Batman the Animated Series, who just feels like he's always butthurt about everything and really hates Batman and whatever. So yeah, it was cool seeing him here, for me at least.
Yeah, it did feel like one of those things where it's just like you've got an actor who you perhaps somewhat unfairly sort of like associate primarily with one particular thing, and then you just see them in something else, and you're just like, whoa, where the hell did they come from? And then even though they probably fit the role fine enough, you're just like, I cannot disassociate them from this. It's just like, it's like, oh, I can't remember that film. It was, what's the name of the actor who plays Loki again in the Marvel films?
Tom Hiddleston.
Tom Hiddleston. It's like I watched a film with him where he's in this like dystopian skyrise block of flats a few years ago, and Jeremy Irons is in that. And only recently I'd been watching the Dungeons and Dragons film as well as also Dead Ringers, and I was just like, I can't dissociate him from this. This is really weird. Like it just had even though I knew that was probably really unfair on him and his performance, because in that film he was actually really good.
Yeah, I think the only thing apart from Marvel stuff I've seen Tom Hiddleston in is Crimson Peak.
Well, exactly, that's what I mean though. Like you probably like watch something else apart from those two things, and then you're just like, oh, that's Loki, and then you're just like, wait, no, wrong franchise.
Yeah, like I'm so used to seeing him as Loki and nothing else. He pretty much is Loki. What's weird though is that audition video that was revealed sometime recently or relatively recently, where apparently Tom Hiddleston was auditioning for the role of Thor but with an American accent, and it was just weird just looking at it.
Yeah, it's audition tapes are, I think they're more commonplace like in the early 2000s and late 90s, but they are a sight to behold, especially if you can get really crap ones.
Yeah, like the ones for The Office US, where it's like there are these notable actors that I'm so used to singing good things that it's like they're really bad as these characters are trying out for.
Yeah, it makes you realize like everyone thinks like, oh, I could do acting really well, and it's just like then you think about it and you try doing it, and it's like actually acting is really quite tricky. Like that's why so good actors are held in such high regard.
Yeah, I guess that's what we think of acting in general. But getting back to the movie, let's see. What'd you think of the overall look of the city of Raccoon City in this like post-apocalyptic era? It's kind of like in the early days from the looks of it, right?
Yeah, I think they got the aspect of it being run down sort of like in disarray and chaos just right, but like they got it right just because obviously considering how early on in the franchise's timeline it is, you can't make it look too desolate. And so I think they cut a really good balance between it looking like absolute turd pile and also looking kind of like still kind of a place that can be saved, and it's also like a bit pristine. But so like it gives that ominous sense of like there's clearly something bad going on, but it's also like there's a sense of like kind of misplaced hope that like everything can be saved.
We also get flashbacks here and there of like the initial outbreak, which I kind of wonder if maybe the movie should have been edited so that the flashback stuff happened first and then we get like the survival stuff. Because I know people sometimes get annoyed by flashbacks. They're kind of hit and miss for me here, but what did you think of that structure?
I don't know. I don't mind flashbacks so much, just as long as they're conveyed in a aesthetically pleasing way that sort of like lends itself to the story. I mean, like, I always thought the amount of flashbacks in the house that Jack built was weird, but then again, it kind of lent itself quite well to the story in that film. And I mean, I definitely wouldn't say it's at the very least not as painful or as annoying or as overused of a trope as like it was all just a dream, So I think it could be worse.
Yeah, that's fair. I feel like they kind of give us a better idea of the characters' relationships to each other. Because, like, when it starts off, it's like, oh, a few of these characters are a team already. Okay, I don't really know them that well. I guess I'm just supposed to assume what they are to each other. And then it's not until, like, some of these flashbacks that we kind of get some context of, like, when they might have hung out after work, like, had a pizza and pint or whatever, and I guess it kind of conveyed some things that were somewhat useful in understanding the characters.
Yeah, it also made me realize just now, like, hearing an American say pint is just it's weird. I don't know. It's like I was playing through Halo 1 recently, and then I heard Cortana say "sod off" to the guilty spark, and I was just like, that just doesn't sound right.
Yeah, I mean, when ordering alcohol in a bar, you can still order a pint over here. But I guess the phrase "let's have a pint" is more of a British thing from what I can tell. So I kind of get what you mean.
Yeah.
Just think of like how the zombies and like the creatures and effects looked in this reboot.
I don't know, they kind of didn't look quite as good as I thought they would, but I think that was kind of waylaid a little bit by the fact that they weren't as like pronounced or like heavily front and center as they were in like the original films, because in the original films the effects definitely show their age by large part of the fact that they were so front and center a lot of the time. Here they're still not quite as good as I was hoping they would be, but they're not quite as pronounced, which kind of inadvertently actually helps them make a look a little bit better inadvertently. So they don't look that great, but I don't know, they could look a hell of a lot worse. But yeah, I think they got the visual aspect of the zombies pretty well down, actually.
Yeah, because thinking back to the effects of the original films, I think the first one, at least, like the effects for that one had kind of a charm to it, like the zombie dogs or whatever, like some of the things in there looked kind of like they were out of a video game or something. But there's something about it that to me had a charm. But as the films kept progressing, I got sick and tired of like all these different like CGI abominations. Not just abominations because they're monsters, but because they look really terrible.
Yeah,
from like an effects standpoint.
I think especially the worst. Again, just showing how exasperatingly awful it was. The effects in the final chapter, the last one, Mila Jovovich, and then just the effects in that film were just surprisingly awful. They looked barely better than the original film.
It's a very ugly film, the final chapter. It's like, yeah, it's surprising that it got made.
It feels like it's got this Vaseline Gorse filter all over the film, and it just looks atrocious.
Whereas in Welcome to Raccoon City, it's nicer to look at least. Like there's at least like a freaking light, like not too much light because it would look too like hopeful, not horrific enough, but it's like you can see what's going on. Like when they're out at night and like trying to survive against the zombies in the street, you can see who's hitting what. It's not like, wait, what's going on? Like, who did someone die here? Like, I feel like it at least shows very clearly like what's going on and who's surviving and how they're surviving. I thought it was particularly like any time they use the revolver, like it had like a nice little sound effect to it. I don't know how to explain it. It just sounded really cool hearing the revolver like hit the zombie heads.
Yeah, it's sort of the sound design was definitely the strongest part of that one.
Yeah, and they even got creative using trying to use a defibrillator as a weapon. And there's even like this question that one of the characters had of like, could this possibly revive the zombies, bring them back to life? And then someone else was like, no, that's stupid. And they just like keep on using it to stave the zombies away when they're like in the hallway and one's trying to get through the door.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a good little bit of I like dry wit like that, where it's just like the characters are up against the wall and they just kind of face death on with like the sense of dry wit. I much prefer that to, at least, to like the Joss Whedon kind of like constantly quirky kind of writing.
Yeah, like with that type of writing, it gets kind of repetitive. Like when you have these fight scenes where people are quipping every single second, it's like you might have, in these situations, you might have time for maybe one quip, but it's like, this is a deadly situation. Like, it's more refreshing to me when there's like a very dangerous fight sequence and you can tell they're actually scared for their lives and trying to keep their wits and not trying to just joke around.
Well, that's what I mean. I don't like films that are like constantly like wisecracking and witty, because it's just like you need some downtime to like kind of appreciate what's going on. That's like part of the reason why I like a lot of like 1980s action films, because as dumb and cheesy as they are, they understand the balance of action and seriousness. It's like a fine art between getting it right, and that's why I quite like this new Resident Evil film, because while it doesn't get that right down to a T, at least it gets it better than a lot of like modern action films, in the sense that, you know, there's a bit of like dry wit and humor, but it's like not so often that it outstays its welcome, at least.
Yeah, the pacing of it kind of reminds me of Day of the Dead, the 1980s one. Like, I felt like that had a good pace to it and wasn't trying to be too funny. Like, it felt serious and dramatic, and it's one of my favorite zombie films, probably, or maybe it's like second tier for me. I feel like Shaun of the Dead would be really high up there for me, but that's an example where it's okay to be funny with that one.
Yeah, it's like Shaun of the Dead. I think it's the bit where in the scene where in the pub when they go up to the, like, I think it's the espresso machine or it's the backwards area where they keep all like the spirits, and they just turn around and there's a zombie there, and it's just like, and it just like has this really blokish reaction that's just very like natural, but it's like quite like funny in the context of what's going on in the film.
Yeah. And there's also an espresso machine in this movie. Like, there's a moment where they find shelter for a bit, and then Claire asks if anyone's feeling thirsty, and like they decide they want some like coffee from the machine, and Chris, like, this was like a really weird moment where Chris is like, you know, I've never had coffee before, and I thought I had a lot of my life ahead of me, and now that I'm finally trying coffee, it's hard for me to really enjoy it, knowing that tomorrow could be the last day. And it's like such a weird contemplative scene to like use coffee in.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like what's the equivalent of that in another film, because that feels like a kind of scene that's happened before, but I can't quite put my finger on it.
Yeah, there's just kind of weird stuff like that where the characters are like, it's cool that there's time for these characters to talk in between the fighting, like not during the fighting, but like in between. But there are weird moments here and there that kind of make me be like, wait, what? And sort of like just kind of laugh a little bit, even if it's not intentional. Like, there's this moment where, you know, they're talking about how Umbrella made all these experiments and like started all this stuff, and one of the characters is like, maybe Frankenstein was the monster, and it's, you know, it's a reference to that whole thing of like, oh, Frankenstein's the scientist, not the monster, but also like the scientist could to some be the monster for like messing with nature or
yeah
whatever.
it's like that. It's like the one moment where they like break through and they try to make something profound that's not directly to do with the film, but then it just like falls flat on its face, and you're just like, oh, shut up! Like, I don't. Like, I get what you're trying to do, but it's literally not unique at all what you're doing, and you're just ramming it down our throats. Like, shut up.
Yeah, like I love the Frankenstein novel, but that line just felt like out of place in the movie, and
it felt like that might as well have just had one of the characters turn to the camera and just go, "This is where we moralize to the audience."
Yeah. I guess while we're on the subject of Umbrella, what'd you think of some of their experiments? Like Lisa Trevor is one of their experiments. What'd you think of how she looked and whatnot? Like how she was revealed?
That was one of the few visual aspects of the film I really unironically liked. I think like a lot of the visual representation of the different characters wasn't great, but the just despairing like monstrosity that is Lisa, and the fact that they got her representation of like this sad kind of tragic figure from that she was in the games, they got that down pretty like accurately actually. So yeah, I think I quite liked her representation. It was actually really accurate to the character, and it worked quite well as well within the context of the film.
Yeah, and it was a really good reveal, and it's like me not being very familiar with Lisa, I was like, whoa, I'm not sure what to think of this character and what she might do or whatever. So I was kind of on the edge of my seat there, unironically. But yeah, we also sometimes get cuts to a different location throughout the movie because Richard Aiken, one of Bravo Team's members, he is said to have disappeared in the Arklay Mountains. And so sometimes we see him over there. It kind of looks like he's hiding out, but possibly also like trying to figure out how to like fight off these monstrosities. Like, what do you think of those segments of the movie?
They kind of felt like they would fit if they were making a Resident Evil miniseries, but and it felt right within the context of and the theming of the franchise. But it felt like it should have been in a different movie. I don't know. It just didn't really quite fit. It felt like at points we were watching two movies at once, and it was quite offsetting because it had like much more of like an action thriller sort of feel to it than the rest of the film. And I was just like, where did this come from? This is like if I'm watching The Bourne Ultimatum and all of a sudden it switches to a scene from like Shooter.
Yeah, like this type of switching between settings might work better for a TV show, but it's like, I feel like with a movie like this where you're fighting off zombies and all sorts of things, you'd prefer to stick with one group throughout, kind of have like that bottle type of feel, like maybe a little bit claustrophobic, where you feel like you can only be with these characters who are facing off this certain threat and on a certain pathway, like basically like following a video game storyline. Like,
I mean, that's kind of why so many people prefer like the first season of The Walking Dead to the second one, because the first one is quite self-contained and concise, whereas the second one is just like overall mess that just follows way too many characters.
Yeah, for me, the main problem with the second season was that they were on the farm for way too long. And so it was like not much happened. Like once they got to the prison, like things picked up a bit, and then there were a couple seasons where things were great, and then a few where the pacing was really poor. But then the last couple of seasons, I feel, brought it back to its glory. But I know people have like dropped off since then, and it's understandable. But yeah, I'm in it for the long haul with this final season whenever I get around to watching it. And like the Walking Dead comic series is my favorite comic series of all time. But anyway, kind of makes me wonder if there are like any Resident Evil comics. There probably are, right? With how big of a franchise it is.
I mean, there has to be. I mean, you'd think if even a slightly more ubiquitous kind of like franchise like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles can have a long-standing comic franchise, then yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah, well, the Turtles began with comics, and then
yeah, but not many people like realize that though. That's the thing. they only really got super popular when the cartoon came out in the 80s.
I'm looking at the Resident Evil wiki. It looks like there are some comics here and there. Because like with some video games, it's like sometimes they'll get a comic book tie-in, I guess, but maybe not like a huge ongoing thing. It depends on like popularity and the resources they want to use, I guess. When they try to like infiltrate like Umbrella's labs, they try to like figure out what the password is to like get into their system. What'd you think of the reveal of what this password was?
I mean, it was about as cringeworthy as the reveal of the origin of Han Solo's name in a solo story. So, I mean, it was pretty bad. Yeah, I didn't think it was anything particularly great, to be quite flatly honest. I thought it was really hammy and it was just in there to be witty, and I just kind of inwardly groaned a little bit, to be honest.
Yeah, hammy is a good way to describe it because the password turned out to be bacon, and it's like they tried to kind of foreshadow it by mentioning that, oh, people at Umbrella, they love watching Kevin Bacon movies, and it's like that was a really random thing to throw in there, and then all of a sudden it's this password that gets them in, and it's like that's
and then
it's
also
dumb.
They also mention like how like Umbrella's testing chambers are like a pig farm as well. And it's just like, where did that come from? Like they don't feel like that at all. It feels more like a man playing with God kind of territory allegory. And so yeah, when the password was bacon, I was just like, that's the most on the nose thing I think I've ever heard. Like it takes a lot to make a Neil Breen film look subtle.
Yeah, like after they do this, they encounter a creature that very much looks like bacon. Like its limbs look like giant strips of bacon, and even its head looks like one. It kind of reminded me of the thumbs, those robot things from the Spy Kids movies that just have thumbs on their limbs and head, and like that's just what they have. It was really weird to look at here, this bacon monster.
I just called him Porchetto Boy after like one of my favorite sandwiches.
Oh, nice.
It's like this really Spanish kind of vegetable in like sort of toasted focaccia ciabatta with like pork belly, salsa al verde, and it's really nice. But I just looked at him and I just started thinking of sandwiches, and then I got really hungry, and I realized that the visual design of that scene was kind of hideous, so I just kind of got really bored.
Yeah, no, I stayed hungry. So like once I saw that bacon monster thing, I was like, I kind of want this movie to end now so I can go out and get some food because like I forgot to eat right before the movie.
Yeah, same. I was just like, I really want this to finish so I can just like, so I can eat so I can have that packet of ham, sort of pork jerky I've got, and then like go and make some egg fried rice because I was really hungry at the time as well.
They get some information that's useful to them about Umbrella. It was kind of confusing to me. Like I wasn't sure like what the information really said because they use so much technical jargon that I couldn't really follow it. I don't know if it's the same for everyone else, but yeah. And then Albert reveals that he's worked for Umbrella this whole time, and it's like, whoa, can we trust this guy? And it's like, I don't know, like anyone's guess is as good as mine because I'm not as familiar with these characters.
Yeah, it's like if you have any passing knowledge of the games, then you know what's going down. But like even if you don't, I think it's kind of obvious, really, because he's constantly like shady and weird and kind of cryptic to the rest of the team.
Yeah, well, like he was kind of acting shifty, but I guess I just talked it down.
No, he just was shifty. He wasn't kind of acting shifty. He's just immediately an odd weirdo from the start.
Right. In hindsight, I feel like I should have noticed it like right away, but I guess I was just like distracted by other things that are going on in the movie. Like, what'd you think of how Ada was utilized?
She kind of just... Even more so than the Mila Jovovich films, she just felt kind of there. So it's just like, oh, why are you here? Like it was just a weird. Her character was even more of a weird non sequitur, but the actress playing her in this film was much better suited to the role, at least. So I did actually enjoy her performance quite a lot.
I wish we'd gotten more of Lily Gao in this role, like in this movie. Like, I don't know if there are like future plans or whatever, but from what little she had, it was like I could kind of see how she could like really like bring this to life. Like she has like this mysterious spy background, and so it makes her kind of intriguing, but they also don't really run with it that much. Like they don't really explain much about what her deal is, and so it's just like you have all these characters who just kind of meet up with each other, and it's like you just kind of run with it and see them go from place to place and try to figure stuff out.
Yeah, it does sort of like start hitting the notes once it gets to the third act, and then, I mean, for the most part, the film felt engaging and enjoyable on the basic level, and then but it did suffer a little bit towards the third act. I feel, when it just sort of kind of fell into one note kind of storytelling. You have like the stereotypical like motorcycle chase.
Yeah.
With like sort of like a monstrous zombie hybrid, and then like, even though the character would do better just by stopping somewhere in a high place and like using heavy weapons on this monster, they instead like sort of like flip backwards on the motorcycle and they just start using their revolver, and you're just like I get this as an action film and you've got to have kind of daft concepts in order for it to be fun and enjoyable, but like this is kind of ridiculous. When that chase happened, that for me was kind of the jumping the shark moment for the film. I could still enjoy it, don't get me wrong, but it was like, from that point on, I was just like, what the hell is going on?
And for the record, there's an episode of Happy Days where the fawns literally jumped over a shark, and it was the best one. That was a Community
You better be joking, otherwise I'm going to come over to America and I'm going to beat you up.
Yeah, no, I was quoting an episode of Community where like Donald Glover's character Troy says that. It was just like the most hilarious thing to me, because it feels like he doesn't know what the term jumping the shark means.
Yeah, it's a reference to when films or TV shows have a moment that's so out of character and so ridiculous that it kind of completely ruins the sense of immersion and enjoyment. And
yeah,
where for anyone who doesn't know, it basically comes from when the legendary TV show Happy Days had the main sort of like everyone's favorite character, the Fonz, get on some skis and like jump over a pit of shark infested water, and it was so out of left field for the rest of the series that it kind of made its ratings plummet. And so for like the final 3 seasons, it just did absolute doo-doo for numbers.
Yeah, like with Friday the 13th, there are definitely jumping the shark moments. Like you just randomly have a character who has like telekinetic powers, and then and then you have
was that in the 6th or 7th film?
The 7th one. The 6th one is where Jason comes back to life, and it all of a sudden has like superhuman strength and can just like punch someone's head off.
Yeah,
it's so ridiculous.
But yeah, no, the 7th Friday the 13th film is bizarre because it is not to directly quote Decker Shadow's review of that film, but it is quite literally just Jason versus Carrie, and it's like beyond weird.
Yeah, I think this is a 3rd episode in a row where Carrie has been mentioned in this podcast.
Why does this keep happening? It's just like me whenever I sit down to eat sushi and all of a sudden I hear the police going outside. It's like, why does this keep happening?
Or like when movies jump the shark by going into space. Why does this keep happening?
Oh my gosh, how many films have done that now? Like Jason did it.
Leprechaun.
Somehow the Leprechaun films did it, yeah. And it's just like, you're just watching Leprechaun in space right after watching Leprechaun in the Hood, and then you're just like, this series is really dumb.
Came out before In the Hood, but yeah.
Did it?
Yeah, like In Space was the 4th one, and then In the Hood was the 5th one.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't know the typography of like the Leprechaun films.
Yeah, how dare you don't know the Leprechaun lore? Yeah, I think the 4th Hellraiser movie was also in space, like at least in a couple scenes. It was really weird.
Of course it was.
And of course, FastX.
It's like if they made another Bertie film with Lindsay Lohan and then they'd set it in space.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen Napoleon Dynamite, but I was just going to say, imagine Napoleon Dynamite in space.
Yeah, the main thing that makes Napoleon Dynamite enjoyable is that it's weirdly grounded.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that aspect of it. But also, I kind of, like, I'm in the minority, but I remember enjoying the animated show, which got canceled after a few episodes because of how, since it's animation, they could get into ridiculous situations and, like, go underwater without question and whatnot. It's just, yeah, I kind of liked it, but I don't know if I'd like it still if I watched it now. Who knows?
Yeah. Kind of like how in Treasure Planet they can go into space without barely any explanation as to why they can just breathe, just without any oxygen masks.
Yeah, that was like around the time Jimmy Neutron was popular, and like Jimmy Neutron never needs like an oxygen mask or anything. There's an episode where Sheen asks him about it, and he explains it, but while he's explaining it, Carl is singing, and so it's like you don't hear the explanation.
Yeah, Jimmy Neutron was strangely ahead of its time, but also like kind of felt like in its own weird bubble of like introspectiveness. It was such an odd series, but it was really, really interesting. My first introduction to that was actually the movie, but yeah,
same.
I wish they were more adventurous with their writing in modern cartoons, and they made more stuff like that these days, because that show was ahead of its time.
Yeah, I think there are cartoons still that are very adventurous and experimental. Like Infinity Train is one that comes to mind. Like I think there are still animated shows that take good risks, but I just don't know what the percentage is because I'm not as in tune with every single animated thing that's coming out these days. It's sort of like if a friend recommends it to me and it's on Netflix or HBO Max or something, I'll check it out and like it might turn out to be like really good. But anyway, yeah, like the end of Welcome to Raccoon City really like you said, that third act feels very tropey to me. Like you have like the final boss type of fight, which like I mean I know this is based on a video game series, but it's like it kind of felt too on the nose to me anyway. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, it kind of felt like like I've said before, I like films that are kind of cheesy and unabashedly action movie-ish, but here it just kind of didn't feel like it fit properly, and it was just it was weirdly jarring. I don't know, it was really, really odd. It just felt like they were going for something like quasi subversive for like most of the final third act, and then all of a sudden like that weird cheesecake action ending comes in, and it's just like, wait, what? Zero Punctuation a few years ago did a review of like this action game that's kind of like sci-fi where you're flying around on jump jets, and then he says like for the most part it's like quite substandard, and then he says like at the end like you fight this giant three-headed robotic dragon, and you're just like, wait, what?
Yeah, it also reminds me of like the Power Rangers reboot movie, which took forever to like get anywhere. Like I get that they were like trying to develop the characters, but it felt kind of weirdly out of place when like toward the end of the movie it feels more like a cheesy Power Rangers TV show where they fight the giant thing at the end. It's just really weird.
Yeah, it does sort of like feel like this is here because movie.
Yeah. How'd you feel about the way the movie ended, though?
I mean, like the final scene, the overall the third act was a bit weird and imbalanced, and kind of its tonal shifts were really strange. But I think in terms of the actual like final scene and the final ending, it at least fit the overall theme of the film. I just wish that the theme overall throughout the film as a whole was like just a little bit more consistent.
And I was really surprised that like there wasn't a big character death. Like I kind of expect that in zombie stories, but in a way this kind of subverts that, which to some might feel refreshing, but to others might feel anticlimactic. I guess it's gotta be like depending on who you ask. For me, it was just kind of whatever. Like I didn't realize it until like after the movie ended that, like, oh yeah, like there wasn't really a major character death. That's kind of weird. And then I just moved on.
Yeah, it just felt kind of like, I really don't want to compare it to this, but it kind of felt like Snakes on a Train in a way where, like, you're just waiting for someone important to die and then no one does, and then you realise, oh, I just wasted an hour and a half of my life and I want to punch myself in the teeth.
Yeah, Snakes on a Train is definitely one of the worst films we've ever seen.
It's
just like that giant CGI snake at the end. It's yeah.
it's easily, I think, my top 3 worst films I've ever watched, alongside that, and I mean, really anything else from The Asylum, to be honest.
Snakes on a Train was bad, but I'm kind of embarrassed to say I've probably seen a couple worse movies than that even.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, for me personally, it's the worst one I've ever seen. But yeah, I can imagine there's probably like 1 or 2 out there that are objectively worse somehow.
Overall, like, how close did this movie feel to the games to you? Like, in terms of tone or adaptation or whatever?
I think in terms of tone and adaptation, it probably was closer to the games than the Mila Jovovich films were. In terms of look and visual style, I think so. Yeah, in terms of like overall representation and adaptation, I think it was probably like a 7 or like a 7.5 out of 10. In terms of like visual style and like visual look, it was probably close to like I'll be honest, like a 4 or 5. Generally speaking, though, I think as like an action thriller film, it was like probably like a 6. I wouldn't say it was like mind blowing, but it was at least competent. Probably a little bit disappointed by it in certain aspects, in that I think it could have had a more fuller bodied sort of like story. But again, like, considering how poor of a reception the previous films had, I don't think we can really complain too much. So generally speaking, I'd rate it a 6 out of 10. As an adaptation of the games, it's probably ranging between like a 4 to a 7 out of 10.
Yeah, I guess we can go into final thoughts and scores while we're into it. So do you have any other final thoughts? And also, like, what's your unit of measurement for those scores?
I'd say it's 6 rocket launcher battles from Resident Evil 3 out of 10.
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar boat. Like, I think this is at least a step in the right direction for Resident Evil movies. Like, it doesn't feel as painful to watch as much of those, like, other ones were. But that being said, like, I feel like I enjoyed this only a bit more than the others. Like the first, like I've said, the first couple were okay, and this one is slightly above those. So I guess for me, like, it was somewhat thrilling in places and not so thrilling in other places. It was just kind of there, but it does make me a little bit curious about where they could take it next. But overall, like, there could be a bit more work done to get me more invested in these movies. So overall, I think I'd give this one like a 6.3 strips of bacon out of 10.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, I guess that'll do it. Thanks for being on this show again, Ted. Where can people find your stuff?
If you search up either Ted's Boo Cellar or Gitbag the Great on YouTube, and on top of that, if you also search up Gitbag on Twitch, and then you can also follow me at Ted_Lord on Twitter, and I will try and impart some of my wisdom about either pop culture or alcohol or pseudo theoretical, pretentious thoughts on your mind, and you should, in theory, have a good time, but probably not.
Yeah, I mean, I generally have a good time, like, talking with you about stuff, even when we disagree, because it's just, like, really funny that way.
We almost always disagree, because you're much more positive-minded, whereas I'm just apathetic and negative almost all the time.
Yeah, I don't think I'm always positive. It's just the things that we end up talking about is stuff I'm more positive about.
You are, compared to me, right? Like, you make me look like Mr. Scrooge, all right? So, yes, you do look...
Oh, yeah, Scrooge from DuckTales, yeah. Right.
Gonna beat you up.
All right. Well, thanks again.
No worries. Sorry that there's been so many instances where you're going to probably have to edit around me swearing, like, or the police coming in the background of the recording.
Yeah, the police coming to your door because you're swearing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently, yeah, because this is actually a Christian server, so no bad language.
So yeah, I guess that'll do it. And people can follow me at Steven Shinder on Instagram and Twitter, Steven Shinder Storytelling on Facebook. And you can find my fantasy horror comedy novel, Lemons Will Like Rain. It's on Amazon. More info at stevenshinder.com. It doesn't have zombies in it, but it has other monsters in it. And more info on the next book whenever more info is available. If you want to email Delayed Replay, you can email delayedreplaypodcast@gmail.com. Send us your, I don't know, cooking tips. Maybe that could be fun. And you can also find me on me and my dad's podcast, Yes Shift, where we talk about the progressive rock band Yes.
When I first watched that, I just thought, geez, Steven's dad literally looks like the evolved Pokemon version of him because he looks almost identical to you.
I mean, there was a time where I looked even more identical to him a few years ago because I actually shaved all the hair off the top of my head and my beard was more trimmed and looked closer. But yeah, I feel like we look a bit more different from each other at the moment because
I mean, you still look pretty similar.
Yeah, like you can tell we're related basically. So yeah. But yeah, that's a lot of fun, and you can find that on anchor.fm/yesshift and find all the other platforms we're on. The next episode, I have a couple ideas of what the next one could cover, but I'll just wait until next time. But without further delay, have a good day.
And eat your greens, drink plenty of water, and don't die.
Words of wisdom from Ted.
You'd be surprised how many people don't follow that advice.